So we looked at eschatology in the early church fathers, which was not uniform. It was underdeveloped and tended to understand the kingdom as existing in heaven. There was a presence of those who believed in a 1,000-year reign of Christ. However, they tended to receive that teaching from Genesis 1 and not from Revelation 20, right? Even before Origen. Augustine came and he provided a detailed exegesis of Revelation 20, which I wish I had you guys read. I think I just forgot it. And in that exegesis, he set the trajectory for reading Revelation 20 and eschatology of the church for the next 1,000 years or so. There was not a major kind of disconnect. Actually, more than 1,000 years. Oh, no, 1,000 years. 1,000 years, because of the Anabaptists. So let's talk about Reformation the overview of eschatology in the Reformation. Big picture is there were no significant eschatological developments in the time of the Reformation. There were no significant eschatological developments in the time of the Reformation. Rather, the reformers tended to go with Augustine's reading. They did, however, speak a lot about the Pope as the Antichrist and a historicist interpretation of Revelation. So you guys talked about historicism last week, right? Or 2 weeks ago. So those would be the two main developments. But for the most part, the reformers were in large agreement with Rome's eschatology. And they showed very little interest in eschatology for the most part. Kim Riddleberger said this: if the reformers did not rewrite the church's established dogma regarding the end times, that Jesus would return at the end of the age to judge the world, raise the dead, and establish a new heaven and a new earth, they certainly tweaked it a bit. They incorporated their eschatological framework into the polemics in pastoral theology, as well as their dogmatic writings. So they pastored with the doctrine of the end times, and they had political theology with their doctrine of the end times. Now, I do want to mention two medieval thinkers, Joachim of Fiore and Thomas Aquinas. And these two are significant. For Joachim Fiore, 1135 to 1202, divided up history in terms of the Trinity. So the Old Testament he saw as the age of the Father. The age of the Son was from Josiah's reform to 1260. And the age of the Spirit would be a time of future revival on earth. And that would begin at 1260. And it would last until the end times. And it would be announced by Enoch and Elijah returning, according to Revelation 13, verse 2. That's what he believed. And that's very important, actually. Very important for setting the stage here. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, we read in his Summa Theologica, question 75, there's going to be a future bodily resurrection of all men. Question 88, there will be a judgment of all men. Question 90, Christ will return visibly. Question 91, there will be no earthly millennial kingdom. So let's look at the overview of, we already saw this. Next, the climate of eschatology in the time of the Reformation. The climate of eschatology in the Reformation contributed significantly to the reformers not really caring much about it, or not progressing it significantly. In that they did talk about eschatology, again, it was more political in mind and pastoral. Many believed that they had already entered the time of the Spirit. And St. Francis of Assisi's monks actually believed that they could identify the Enoch and Elijah, that they had come back. So that's one, is there's just that backdrop of Joachim of Fiore, but also the radical views of the Anabaptists. The radical eschatological views of the Anabaptists especially turned off Martin Luther to studying eschatology. And I want to give you one example, the Munster Rebellion. How many of you know about the Munster Rebellion, the story of the Munster Rebellion? What's that? The Anabaptists, the Munster Rebellion. You guys have heard that story? That's great. So 18 years, this is 18 years after Luther nails the 95 Thesis. Melchior Hoffman, who lives in the Netherlands, he believed that the end of the world was coming soon and that 1,000-year reign of Christ was going to follow. Okay? And 1534 was 15 centuries after Christ died on the cross. So he believed that 1534 was going to trigger the end times. So 1 year before, in 1533, he began preaching that judgment was coming and only 144,000 were going to be saved and the rest of the world would perish. And Christ was going to return to Strasbourg. Yeah, it makes sense. That's right. Yeah. So Hoffman and his followers would go to Strasbourg. They would assemble there, and they ended up being arrested because Catholics were ruling at the time, right? Hoffman's locked in a tower, and all his followers were killed. Hoffman really misunderstood, though, as he was reflecting in prison. He misunderstood there's two things I got wrong. There's two things I got wrong in this. Number one, the date, right? I got the date wrong. I got to go back. I got to do the math again. You find this in all these guys who give you dates. I got the math wrong. That's one. But two, he got the location wrong. It wasn't going to be Strasbourg. It was going to be Munster, Germany. Munster, Germany was going to be where Christ would return. Now, Munster was a very interesting place because it was filled with both Lutherans and Catholics. Okay, the Catholics ruled Munster. It was ruled by a Catholic, the Prince Bishop, who didn't live in Munster. Okay, he lived outside of Munster, and there was a town council that kind of ruled in his place, and they were mostly Lutheran. Which creates all kinds of problems, right? When the town council is made up of both Lutherans and Catholics, however, mostly Lutherans on the council. And there's many conflicts then inside the city between the Lutherans and the Catholics, which is when Bernard Rothman shows up. Bernard Rothman shows up to Munster, and he would especially preach against, he was a preacher, he preached against Catholics and relics and icons. And often, he was a radical Anabaptist, right? But he often had the ears of many of the Lutherans on the town council. And one of them, his name was Bernard Knipperdollen. Bernard Knipperdollen was a Lutheran on the council who was especially interested in this teaching. Even he even issued Bernard Rothman a bodyguard to protect him as a preacher. Well, now we get Jan van Leyden. Jan van Leyden shows up on the scene. He's Dutch. And who does he know about? He knows about, try to guess. Hoffman. Yeah, he's heard Hoffman. Because he's Dutch, right? And he comes to Munster because Melchior Hoffman said Munster was the place that Christ was going to return. And Bernard Knipperdollen and Bernard Rothman were sending pamphlets from Munster, letting him know that Munster is going to be swayed to become Anabaptist. The town council is slowly becoming Anabaptist. It's slowly becoming Lutheran. And that must mean that Jesus is going to return to Munster soon, like Melchior Hoffman said. Well, this attracts many outsiders to Munster. Now, the thing about Munster that you have to understand, with a Catholic overseeing things, think about the situation. You have a Catholic archbishop who's overseeing things, a town council made up of Lutherans and Catholics, and now you have an Anabaptist coming in who hates all of them. This place was just ripe for an explosion. Like if there was going to be an apocalyptic end of the world place, Munster, Germany is the place, right? This place is a political, just absolute nightmare. And many decide to come to Munster. Many immigrants come to Munster because they believe that Melchior Hoffman was right and the end of the world is going to come. The tracts that are being passed out are right. And one of Melchior Hoffman's radical beliefs was what we would probably call today Marxism or communism, that there's just this radical idea of sharing of wealth. So who do you think decided to come to Munster? The poor people. The poor people come to Munster because that's the place where they can get rich, and because Jesus is coming back. Now, the poor, when they came, the town council is made up of Lutherans and Catholics. Who do you think the poor voted for? Do you think that when elections came up for the town council, who do you think they voted for, the Lutherans or the Catholics? The Lutherans, yeah. So the town council slowly became more and more Lutherans. But not just Lutherans, but Lutherans who were sympathizing with Anabaptists. This sets the stage then for Jan Matthias, the second Jan, right? There's two Jans. There's Jan van Leyden, Jan Matthias to come in. And he's an Anabaptist extremist. He's a friend of Jan van Leyden who's invited to go to Munster, okay? But he doesn't go yet. He doesn't go yet. He begins preaching that Christ is going to come back soon, and all of the unfaithful need to die. Anyone who's unfaithful needs to die. And when Jesus returns, he's going to give the sword of judgment to the faithful. And the faithful are going to take the sword of judgment and kill the wicked. And when they kill all the wicked, the millennium's going to come in. So the call is then to be faithful in the present, wait for the sword to be given to you, and then you're going to go out and you're going to kill all those wicked Catholics and Lutherans, right? So the slaying of the wicked would begin the prophecy of Munster, Germany, because that's where Jesus would return to, right? Munster. So Jan van Leyden is proclaimed to be as Jan van Leyden is preaching all of this, Jan Matthias looks in. You know what he thinks of Jan van Leyden? Think of Jacob of Fior. He's Elijah. And then Jan Matthias, in his preaching, sees 1,400 baptized. They began following him. So you know what he concludes? I must be Enoch. And Jan van Leyden must be Elijah. So you know what we need to do? We got to team up. So Jan van Leyden starts announcing that the second coming is near, and the people need to repent. People need to repent in Munster. 4 responses. 4 responses. 1, the Prince Bishop. Prince Bishop, who is a what? A Catholic. He begins, what do you think he does? He's the ruler of Munster. What would you do if you were him? If there's this Anabaptist uprising, poor people are coming in, Lutherans are being voted onto the town council, and you're being told that people believe that this year Christ is going to return here, and anyone who's not Anabaptist is going to die. What would you do? Convert. You would convert? But he doesn't live there. He lives outside of Munster. He starts writing letters. He starts writing letters asking the city to denounce the Anabaptists. Okay, the town council. Town council. Do you think they listen to the letters or no? No, they don't listen to the letters. Because it's becoming overwhelmingly Lutheran, anti-Catholic, right? So they allow the teaching to continue, and they claim religious liberty. Now the people, when they hear Jan van Leyden preaching repentance, when you read accounts, diaries of this, it's pretty crazy what happens. They throw themselves on the ground. Literally, they throw themselves on the ground and start screaming. Now, people are confused about why this happened. Like, was there actually some kind of spiritual experience here? Were they being manipulated? Someone actually posits that there was drugs slowly being let into the water system to make people more susceptible to heightened states of emotions. And they begin inviting all of their friends to come to Munster so they can experience the second coming. So you continue to have this coming of people into Munster. But what's supposed to happen with the second coming? Do you remember? What's going to happen first according to Jan van Leyden and Jan Matthias? 144,000. Well, that was Melchior Hoffman. But the sword is going to be given to kill the wicked. So when the people living in Munster invite their friends, they tell them, bring your weapons. Bring weapons with you. Because this is going down. And it's going down in Munster, Germany. Again, this place is like, if there's like a TNT, like ready to blow, like the fuse has been lit. I mean, this place, if you're looking for an end of the world city, this is the place. And all the people began frantically destroying Catholic icons and relics, just in masses, just going to the churches and destroying them. And by the end of February, another election comes to the town council. Okay? And who do you think the majority of the town council, what do you think they become? Anabaptist, yeah. So they're kicking both the Lutherans and the Catholics out. And this is when Jan Matthias comes to Munster. Enoch and Elijah are both there, the two prophets. Jan Matthias teams up with Jan van Leyden, Enoch and Elijah. And Jan Matthias begins preaching that anyone who wasn't one of his followers, who wasn't an Anabaptist, is going to die. Because Christ is going to come, he's going to give them the sword of judgment, he's going to kill everyone. And Bernard Nipperdalen tries to reason with him. Right? He's his friend, right? Please. I mean, we can't have this. You can't kill the Lutherans, you can't kill the Catholics. And Jan Matthias talks to God about it. And what do you think God tells him? God tells him, just exile the people who disagree with you. You don't have to kill them. That's very nice of God, isn't it, to say that? February 27th, 1534. The Anabaptists kick the Catholics out of the city in the exile that God, commanded, right? And they don't let them take any of their belongings with them. You have to leave. You have to leave now. You can't take any of your stuff. So that's the Catholics. The Lutherans are asked if they will be rebaptized so they can stay in Munster, because they're not as bad as the Catholics. Most left. Some stayed. And Jan Matthias orders the death of any Catholic or Lutheran who didn't leave. And around this time, all the Anabaptists who had been receiving letters from their family and friends come to Munster and bring your pitchforks and swords and stuff. They start showing up. I mean, this is a bad situation getting worse and worse. So the Prince Bishop decides to respond. How do you think he responds this time? First he wrote letters. How do you think he responds this time? He sends his son. He sends military troops. He decides to put the city under siege. But he doesn't have enough of an army to really surround the entire city of Munster. So people are still sneaking out at night. And when they sneak out, they give literature. Again, inviting people, come to Munster. This is where it's going down. So thousands of Anabaptists continue to come to Munster, and they sneak in at night. And no matter how bad things get, more keep coming, and they come with weapons. Inside Munster, Jan Matthias orders the burning of all books except one. What book is that? The Bible, yeah. All books need to be burnt except the Bible. Now, there's a local blacksmith who doesn't like this. He doesn't like burning all these books except the Bible. And so he voices opposition against, Enoch or Elijah, which is not going to go over well for him. Jan Matthias calls all the people of Munster together to the town square, and he begins a long speech saying he's going to execute the rebellious blacksmith. And the whole town is gathered here. And this is really the first time that Jan Matthias has done anything crazy publicly. And there's people there that start to say, you can't do this. Like, you can't just say this person's guilty and then kill him. Like, we have due process. And Matthias has the people in the crowd who voice opposition arrested. And more in the crowd start to become unhappy because of this. They start all speaking out against Matthias. And Jan van Leyden, who hasn't done much publicly to this point, looks next to him and finds a spear. He takes the spear and stabs the blacksmith. Setting himself up really to be the second in command. Here's the problem. He's never really killed anyone before, and he does a bad job. The blacksmith doesn't die. So then, as the blacksmith continues to just writhe in pain on the floor, he looks next to him, and there's a man standing there who has a pistol. And Jan van Leyden grabs the pistol and shoots the blacksmith. The blacksmith still doesn't die. So they take him and put him in a hospital. And it takes the guy 8 days to die from the spear and the and the bullet wound. So this set a precedent then for any time anyone questioned Jan Matthias, for them to be locked up. So what he would do is anytime someone questioned him, he would lock them up in a cathedral. And he would tell them he's going to go ask God what he should do with them. So he'd lock them in the cathedral for several hours at a time while he talks to God. And he hears from God and then comes back and decides on the matter. And of course, God always wants the same thing that Jan Matthias wants, of course. Well, then comes Easter 1534. This is the year Christ is supposed to come back, right? Just before Easter, Jan Matthias is at a banquet, and he appears to have a seizure. He wakes up and kisses everyone in attendance on the lips, and then leaves. Everyone's confused, like, what's this guy doing? Well, he announces later that while his head hit the table, he had a vision. He had a vision that the prince bishop would be ending the siege soon, and God wants him to lead a charge personally against the Catholics that are surrounding the city. Now, at this point, the army's the numbers go back and forth, somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 people. And Jan Matthias chooses Easter Sunday, 1534, to lead the charge. He goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, and he decides he's going to take with him about 8 bodyguards. And he charges this army of thousands of people. Now, the Prince Bishop sees him coming. He's confused at first. Prince Bishop, at first, what would you think was happening? Maybe like terms of surrender or something like that. But then he realizes like swords are being drawn. Like this is an actual attack. And the Prince Bishop sends 500 men and just kills him. It's done. And they take him, they brutally kill him. I mean, this is bad. This is crazy stuff that happens. May 25th, 1534. So Jan Matthias is dead. Who's the obvious next in command? Yeah, Jan van Leyden. He claims to take over. He claims that God told him 8 days before the charge that Jan Matthias would die. Right? So he shows up dressed in all white, claiming that God had come to him in a vision, saying that the reason Jan Matthias died was because he charged into the enemies for his own glory and not for the glory of God. And God's desire was now that Jan van Leyden would be in charge. And the Prince Bishop plans an assault then for May 25, 1534, an official assault. But there's a problem. The night before, the soldiers that are besieging the city, there's a small group of them that decides to drink. And they decide to drink a little bit too much in the afternoon, right? Not at night, in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, they see the sun setting. And they're so slammed, they mistake the sun setting for the sun rising. And they're afraid that they've missed the battle charge. So they grab their swords and their shields and they charge at Munster. This small group of people. And there are other people in the army who see this and they think, we missed the memo. Like, now is the time for the attack. The attack is supposed to happen at night, not during the day, which is a bad time to lay attack on the city. Well, the Anabaptists are able to push them back, and they're led by Jan van Leyden, who's riding a white horse. A shocking announcement comes. In June 1534, Jan van Leyden receives a prophecy that God desires 2 things. What do all cult leaders get? They would get money and sex, yeah. God now desires polygamy and adultery. Now, a lot of people inside of Munster there had actually been a lot of former nuns that had come to Munster who had found Anabaptist sympathy, and a lot of former nuns had come there. So that some historians record there was about 3 women for every 1 man. Okay? So God now desires adultery and polygamy. And conveniently, he has this vision, this revelation from God, the morning after he was caught sleeping with a woman. And there's this conflict then inside the city, because the Anabaptists have always been told, no, we don't commit these kinds of things. We don't do these abominations. And now there's all kinds of problems. So the conflict in the city, while there's a rising conflict outside the city. And all the people are getting upset about this new law that God desires adultery and polygamy. The prince bishop assembles thousands of more officers. And he offers Jan van Leyden terms of surrender. Jan van Leyden is anointed by Bernard Rothman. He's given a sword. And he begins to call himself no longer Enoch, no longer Elijah, but King David. Van Leyden said that they had it all wrong. They had it all wrong. God was not going to deliver them physically. God was going to deliver them spiritually. And as he kept talking to God and as he kept reading his Bible, he realized that God promised destruction and death. And he urged all the people to stay in the city and to starve to death, which many of them did. Many of them began eating stones that they were told was actually bread, but their eyes didn't have the faith to behold that they were bread. And the prince bishop charged the city, and leading an assault against him was Jan van Leyden, wearing his Davidic crown, holding his sword, and riding on his white horse. And some say he was pierced through the side with a spear, like Jesus Christ himself. And the Munster Rebellion was squashed. Why do I tell this story? I tell this story because this is the kind of the crazy stuff that was happening with the Anabaptists. So Luther, and this was happening in Luther's lifetime, in the same country, 15 years or 17 years after Luther nailed the 95 Thesis. He did not have much interest in developing eschatology because of that.